President Cyril Ramaphosa announced on Sunday that the Social Relief of Distress grant will be reinstated until March 2022. The grant of 350 rand, which is administered by the South African Social Security Agency, will also be extended to unemployed caregivers who currently receive child support grants. Previously, anyone who received support from the state was ineligible for SRD payments. While some have welcomed the announcement, others have criticized it for being too little too late. Joining me now for a chat about this is Professor Leila Patel from the University of Johannesburg Center for Social Development in Africa. Professor Patel, good to have you with us this afternoon. Perhaps let's start with exactly what role social grants play in the lives of the recipients.
Good afternoon, Tommy. We've done a lot of research over the years, various South African researchers, and the grant system has certainly played an important role in reducing poverty and income inequality. And in our research over the last year, since the pandemic started, we've seen its positive impact on food security and also hunger.
We talk about
yes. Go ahead.
We talk about food security there, Professor Patel, but how far does 350 rand actually go?
So we also know that that the value or the amount of the grant is important in its impact. So currently the 350, of course, is very low. It is below the food poverty line if we take that to be 585 rand a month in 2020. So it doesn't really meet the food poverty line standard yet. But having said that, we've seen throughout the research over the last year that the child support grant in particular has had a significant impact on hunger and food security. The SRD in particular, other researchers have found at the University of Cape Town that it also reduced poverty and income inequality, and the SRD also improved, in fact, a job search capacity or ability among beneficiaries. So there is considerable evidence that it does make a difference. It is a little, but it does go quite a long way in ameliorating the current severe impact of the pandemic.
There's also been advocacy from some quarters for a basic income grant. Just your thoughts on that and how that would likely affect the recipients of it and how it will affect those job search capabilities, how it will affect the alleviation of poverty, and how it will affect, I guess, the will from the recipients to actually go out and earn more money for themselves through gainful livelihood.
So the basic income grant proposals, and there have been different proposals over time, but basically the idea of a basic income is to guarantee all citizens, irrespective of your income or employment, a basic income. So what that amount should be, of course, varies depending on different proposals, but that is the thinking behind the South African idea of a basic income, which is seen to be a universal income. There are different ways in which it is conceptualized. Some see a basic income as universal coverage, making up both social assistance and also social insurance schemes. So a combination of the two will also bring about universal coverage. So I think there's a lot of debate and I think creative thinking about this, but that is a longer term solution. And the President's announcement is really about the present now, although he has made statements and the Minister has made statements that the government is considering a basic income grant. But this is a temporary measure. It runs for 8 months and it will certainly strengthen the safety net. It will also support, bring valuable support and relief to to women grant beneficiaries, who are the majority of CSG beneficiaries, although men also receive the CSG, and they will also be covered. So that's going to expand the safety net hugely. Currently, if we think of the SRD as reaching 6 million people, with the new provisions, it will extend that to bring between another 3 and 4 million additional people into the safety net, costing government probably in the region of about 4 billion rand a month. And over the 8 months, it would be between, say, 25 and 35 billion rand, I estimate it to be.
And talk to us, and the President did allude to this in his speech about where South Africa is going to be getting the money to foot this bill.
Mm-hmm. He intimated that the improvements in the commodity prices has certainly brought more funding into the fiscus. So he doesn't seem to be saying that this will be funded through additional taxes, but he seems to think that it can be accommodated within the existing budget. We will certainly learn a lot more about it, because regulations would have to be published, and then we'll see how it will work. But the SRD, as it's now conceived, has the potential also to address gender inequality issues, because before, when the top-ups were phased out by October last year, women in particular, who are most affected also by food insecurity, were excluded from accessing the SRD. So this will bring a large group of people into the system and, advance gender equality as well.
Now, Professor, previously those who were receiving any other sort of assistance from the state were not eligible for the SRD. Talk to us about the impact that this will have should one be getting two forms of support from the state.
The way the SRD was conceptualized in the beginning, that's a year ago, it was really to get funding, to get money into households quickly, given the impact of the pandemic and, of course, the impact of the hard lockdown in April and May of last year. So it was conceptualized or designed to reach a group of people who are unemployed, but also informal workers who were severely impacted by the pandemic. And so that group of people who didn't have access to other grants were excluded from benefits, because our grant system doesn't cover people who are economically active. So it covers, women and beneficiaries of the child support grant would be potentially economically active, but that group of people large numbers are unemployed. So it was really designed to fill a hole in the safety net.
I'd like to focus, Professor, on this aspect. I mean, you are from social development studies, and your studies are not just in South Africa, but you really focus on development on the African continent. Zoning it back to South Africa, is there a link between allegiance to a governing party or allegiance to the source of social relief and the polls? And I ask you this because in as much as this measure has been received positively in many quarters, there is some slight criticism and perhaps a bit of skepticism saying it's a temporary measure that will only go up to next year's local government elections. But is there any sort of documentation or any sort of proof that voters do actually pay allegiance to the party or the organ that provides their social relief?
Tammy, we released a study very recently, in fact, on the impact of social grants and other forms of social protection, including, what people's views are, what influences their voting behavior in South Africa. And what we found over 4 years of research between 2017 and 2020 was that, and we looked at social grants as one of the factors that influence voter choices. And some of it would be, satisfaction with governance and service provision and the reasons why people vote the way they do, including leadership, and trust in their party. But the one thing that we looked at was, do grants influence how people vote? And over 4 years of tracking grant beneficiaries, not the same people in the study, but over 4 data points, we find that receipt of a grant doesn't influence your vote. But if you feared that you would lose your grant, then you would more likely vote for the governing party than an opposition party. I think it's important to distinguish between what is known as patronage. So is your grant a patronage and a vote-buying exercise? And I've said before that from the data, it looks to us that that is not the case, and we shouldn't see it like that, because in South Africa, your right to a social grant is a constitutional right, and there's policy and legislation that governs who qualifies, and so a politician couldn't simply walk the streets and offer a grant in exchange for a vote, for instance.
Professor Patel, thank you very much for your insight and the evidence as well that you've brought forward on the studies that you made regarding the link between allegiance to a party that provides you with social grants and the vote, because that certainly is a topic of discussion in many quarters. Thank you. That's Professor Leila Patel from the University of Johannesburg Centre for Social Development in Africa.